Welcome. This episode was made with NotebookLM. It serves as a refresher for those already familiar with MCDP 1 to 4 competing, and a solid overview for those beginning to study it. MCDP 1 to 4 matters because it shows that Marines are always competing, from ambiguity and innovation to strategic advantage. It teaches how to operate along the competition continuum and harness ambiguity as an asset. It's not just about fighting, it's about thinking and acting strategically at every level. Simplify and enjoy. End.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well-informed, where we cut through the noise and zero in on the most crucial insights from the documents and ideas that shape our world. Today, we're embarking on an intellectual expedition into something profoundly important for every Marine. MCDP 1 to 4, competing. For far too long, many of us have subconsciously approached international relations with a pretty simplistic, almost binary mindset. We're either at war or at peace. It's clean, it's tidy, right? And it fits neatly into our traditional frameworks. But if you cast an honest eye over the global landscape today, that clear-cut dichotomy starts to feel, well, inadequate, doesn't it? The real truth, as this document so powerfully argues, is far more intricate. It exists in a vast, nuanced, and often volatile space between those two stark extremes.
Yeah, that's precisely the philosophical earthquake MCDP 1 to 4 delivers. It's not just another pub to add to the shelf. It's a fundamental reorientation of how we perceive the world. The document lays it out very clearly. Actors on the world stage are always trying to create a relative advantage for themselves, and critically, outright violence, while always a possibility, is often the exception, not the rule. Most actors are relentlessly pursuing their goals through myriad other means, in a constant state of competitive interaction. So this deep dive really challenges us to expand our understanding of what competition truly means and how deeply it permeates everything we do.
And that's our singular mission today. We're not here for a surface-level summary of MCDP 1 to 4. For those of you who are active duty Marines, veterans, or military scholars, you've likely already engaged with it. Instead, this is a chance to truly peel back the layers, to explore the deeper philosophy, the why, behind this crucial publication. Think of this as less of a briefing and more of a high-level PME seminar, an intellectual expedition to uncover the foundational principles and their profound real-world implications, moving beyond the what to the how and why of strategic intent.
And it's vital to remember that the document itself parallels Marine Corps Doctrinal Publication 1, Warfighting. I mean, that comparison alone signals its foundational importance. It's specifically designed to be read from cover to cover, not just skimmed or used as a quick reference manual. That underscores its conceptual nature. Its explicit purpose is to stimulate thinking and encourage additional learning, and importantly, it requires judgment and application. So what we aim to do here is foster that analytical, reflective tone, encouraging you to engage with these concepts critically and apply them thoughtfully in your own professional context, wherever you might be on that competition continuum.
The sheer weight of that comparison to warfighting, that should resonate deeply with anyone familiar with Marine Corps doctrine. When General Berger states in the foreword, like maneuver warfare, competing is a way of thinking, he's not just offering a casual observation, he's elevating it. He is elevating competition to the same foundational mental framework as maneuver warfare itself. It's not simply another tactic or operational approach. It's a profound shift. A shift in how we as Marines are expected to perceive and navigate the world. What do you think he means by calling it a way of thinking, and why is that so critically important right now?
Well, General Berger's vision for elevating competition to a way of thinking is incredibly insightful and far-reaching. He clearly articulates 3 key reasons why understanding this continuum is essential for every Marine. Firstly, there's awareness. He emphasizes that from recruitment to retirement, Marines are an integral part of the nation's strategic competition. This isn't some future scenario. It's continuous, it's omnipresent, it's reality right now. It means recognizing that every action, every posture, every interaction, whether you're in a combat zone or, say, during a humanitarian mission, contributes to this larger strategic game. You are always on the playing field.
Always engaged.
Exactly. Secondly, it's about creativity. Once Marines truly grasp the diverse nature and, the multifaceted forms of competition, it's intended to unleash creativity. This understanding leads to the development of new kinds of competitive advantages. It's moving beyond simply reacting to traditional threats. Instead, it's about innovating novel solutions and approaches that proactively shape the environment. It fosters an adaptive mindset that seeks advantage in, well, sometimes unexpected places.
Finding leverage where others don't see it.
Precisely. And finally, it addresses partnership. This publication expands the discussion on how and where Marines fit into the continuum and where to look for their natural partners in competition. This really underscores the Marine Corps' inherent and crucial role in what is explicitly defined as a renewed great power competition. It's about recognizing that we are a vital player in a larger team, whether that team involves joint forces, interagency partners, or international allies. Our effectiveness often hinges on our ability to integrate seamlessly with others operating across this complex spectrum.
Okay, that's a powerful and essential framework to kick things off.
Yeah.
So let's unpack this idea of an enduring state of interaction. If we're not rigidly fixed in war or peace, what is this state? What does it truly look like, and how can we begin to visualize something so inherently fluid? MCDP-1 itself gives us a foundational clue, stating, total war and perfect peace rarely exist in practice. Instead, they are extremes between which exist the relations among most political groups. That immediately shatters the comfortable simplicity of the binary, right?
Yep, exactly. And to help us conceptualize this, MCDP 1-4 provides some illustrative models. Figure 1, the linear competition continuum model, presents a spectrum bounded by those theoretical extremes of pure peace and total war. Critically, it places a violence threshold somewhere in the middle. Below that threshold, you find a vast array of activities like economic competition, classic diplomacy, maybe political warfare. Above it, the activities escalate to hybrid war, gray zone operations, conventional war, ultimately leading towards total war. This linear model visually dismantles that simplistic war-peace binary. It showcases the immense and wide spectrum of struggle that constantly exists. It's not about finding discrete, separate boxes. It's about recognizing the fluidity, the subtle shifts, the constant underlying tension.
Right, it's a gradient. And then the document offers figure 2, the circular competition continuum model, which, if I'm particularly insightful, it really captures the dynamic nature of this competition. The linear model shows the range, maybe, but the circular model shows the flow.
Indeed. This circular model elegantly positions conflict above the violence threshold and competition below it. Imagine starting at the bottom of the circle, where competition might be at a lower intensity. As you move clockwise, competitive actions increase in intensity, steadily approaching that violence threshold. Now, here's where it gets really interesting and illustrates the shift in thinking. If the struggle doesn't cross into outright conflict, there are multiple pathways back. An actor could be effectively deterred, right? Or the threat of violence itself might have been sufficient leverage to achieve goals. Or perhaps diplomatic negotiations could succeed. All these outcomes lead back to a state of competition below the threshold.
So it's not a one-way street.
Not at all. But the model also explicitly shows that sometimes the threshold is crossed, maybe even for a short time, before returning to competition. This illustrates that movement is incredibly fluid. Deterrence, achieving specific goals, even skilled negotiation can all bring interactions back below that threshold where the persistent struggle just continues.
So these aren't rigid definitions or immutable laws. They're cognitive tools. The document explicitly says these models are intended to help Marines think about the continuum, encouraging them to study variations of this model, to develop a deeper sense of its evolution and how it appears in different situations. It's a call to critical thinking, not just memorization. What's the biggest trap for us as Marines if we don't fully internalize the fluidity these models represent?
That's a fantastic question, because the biggest trap is absolutely clinging to the binary. If we only prepare for war or just assume peace, we miss the vast majority of ongoing interactions. Interactions where our rivals are gaining ground incrementally, below the threshold of our conventional response. This intellectual exercise, this critical thinking, is absolutely essential, and if we connect this to the broader historical context, it resonates powerfully with George Kennan's 1948 concept. Political warfare is the logical application of Clausewitz's doctrine in time of peace. Kennan famously advocated for using overt and covert means short of war. His work was instrumental in shaping the Cold War, helping U.S. decision-makers understand that the struggle with the Soviet Union wasn't solely about military confrontation. It was a constant, multifaceted competition across all elements of national power. The core lesson for Marines today is this: accurately identifying the true nature of the competition we're in, not the war we wish we were fighting, or the peace we hope for, is absolutely paramount for success. If we misdiagnose the game, we'll inevitably choose the wrong tools and find ourselves playing catch-up.
That brings tremendous clarity. So if competition is truly the norm, this constant state of tension, where does war, as we traditionally understand it, fit in? We've always been taught to prepare for war, right? To fight and win our nation's battles. Is war still this singular defining event? Or does MCDP 1-4 integrate it more deeply into this competitive continuum, making it just one, albeit violent, aspect of a larger struggle?
It's definitely the latter, and this is a significant reframing. The document explicitly states that war resides on the competition continuum above the threshold of violence. It's defined, as Clausewitz taught us, as a political act that uses violence. But crucially, it's also part of a spectrum of other competitive acts that do not use violence. So war is not an isolated phenomenon, not some separate chapter in history. It's a special, highly violent, and profoundly impactful kind of competition that exists within that broader continuum. Think of it as a decisive, high-stakes move in a much longer, more complex game of chess, but still very much part of that larger match.
And it sets conditions for what follows. The document uses that powerful example of war sets the conditions for the post-conflict competition, with the total military defeat of Japan and WWII. It wasn't merely the end of the shooting war, it was the decisive opening act for a new competitive dynamic.
Exactly. The U.S. didn't just win the war in the Pacific, it then imposed the conditions for the subsequent competitive environment. Drafting a new constitution for Japan, guaranteeing its defense through a treaty, providing massive economic aid for reconstruction, these actions fundamentally shaped the post-war relationship. Japan, with U.S. assistance, rebuilt its economy, eventually becoming a significant economic competitor for the U.S. in later decades, even while remaining a close strategic ally. This perfectly illustrates how the outcome of even the most extreme violence in war creates enduring, long-term competitive dynamics. It demonstrates that war is indeed integrated into this persistent struggle of national interests. It's a powerful reminder that victory in war doesn't mean the end of competition, it merely changes its nature.
That's a critical point for any Marine to internalize. Now, if war and competition are indeed on a continuum, what shared attributes do they possess? What common denominators demand a similar mindset and skill set for Marines, whether they're operating above or below that violence threshold?
Well, what's truly fascinating here is how many fundamental traits are shared. It demands a consistent intellectual approach and, frankly, operational resilience. The document highlights several key attributes, beginning with ambiguity. It states bluntly, ambiguity seems to be everywhere. Rivals intentionally cloak their actions, they obscure their true aims, and even use deception to cause indecision and confusion in their adversaries. Think back to the early days of the U.S. Al-Qaeda struggle in the 1990s. It took years for the full nature of that competition to become clear. Furthermore, within nations, multiple centers of power, internal factions, or even just differing bureaucratic interests can make a competitor's intentions appear confusing or conflicting from our external perspective. It's a fog that's often intentionally generated.
And closely related to that fog of ambiguity is uncertainty. MCDP 104 echoes MCDP 1 by calling uncertainty a pervasive trait of competition, just as it is in war. Rivals masterfully leverage ambiguity to inject uncertainty, often employing tactics like gradualism or salami slicing. Could you elaborate on what that looks like in practice? Salami slicing.
Yeah, sure. Salami slicing is when an adversary takes small, incremental steps, none of which, on their own, seem significant enough to trigger a major military or diplomatic reaction from the other side. But the sum of these small steps ultimately achieves a fait accompli, a strategic goal that is already accomplished before the rival fully comprehends what's happened. Think of a nation slowly encroaching on disputed territory, building a small outpost here, conducting a minor patrol there. Each step is minor, but over time, de facto control is established.
Got it. Little bites.
Exactly. Then there's boundary stretching. This is about using measures short of war to force movement or change in the nature of a boundary to gain greater regional influence. The document provides a vivid and frankly stark example with Russia exploits and stretches thresholds in Eastern Europe. Their actions in Georgia in 2008 and then more extensively in Ukraine starting in 2014 demonstrated how Russia progressively recalibrated international responses. They normalized new limits on what was considered acceptable international behavior, all without triggering a full-scale war at the time. It's about continuously testing where the red lines truly are and then pushing them further out until the map itself effectively changes.
And the environment itself is described as inherently fluid, disorderly, and complex. MCDP 1-4 emphasizes that the environment is dynamic, nonlinear, systemic. Our actions, and those of rivals, create unpredictable changes, leading to greater disorder rather than a neat resolution. Marines are told they must learn to thrive in this environment, rather than vainly trying to impose perfect order. It's a profound call to embrace adaptability, right? To ride the waves rather than try to calm the storm.
Absolutely. And the final, arguably most crucial shared attribute is the human dimension. For Marines operating anywhere on this continuum, especially near that violence threshold, the threat of violence profoundly affects human decision-making. It significantly increases the potential for misjudgment, overreaction, or even paralysis. This, interestingly, creates a source of competitive advantage for those who can control their emotions. Staying calm under pressure is key. The document also astutely points out how national culture, whether it favors holistic versus analytical thinking or has an inherent bias toward action versus consensus, significantly influences competitive choices. Understanding these deeply human elements is a constant area of study and self-reflection for Marines, because you can bet our rivals are certainly studying ours.
So given this inherently complex, ambiguous, uncertain, and ever-changing environment, how do Marines actually operate successfully? What unique blend of skills, what blend of art and science is needed to navigate this continuum effectively?
Well, what's essential here is internalizing the art, science, and dynamic of competition. The art involves creativity, right? The imaginative capacity to imagine different ways and means for Marines to contribute. It's about innovative problem solving, seeing possibilities where others see only obstacles. The science involves the rigorous discipline of constructing a set of steps along a timeline to help reach them, along with the necessary feedback loops to refine those steps, learn from experience, and continuously improve performance. So it truly is about both imaginative problem solving and systematic analytical execution.
And it's clearly not just about what Marines can accomplish in isolation, is it?
Yeah.
The document explicitly calls for a comprehensive strategy.
Absolutely. Marines are expected to get comfortable asking for authorities to use tools in new domains, like cyber or support to public diplomacy, and to proactively identify and integrate joint and interagency capabilities to contribute to this comprehensive strategy. This isn't just a military-centric view. It's about seamlessly integrating all available instruments of national power, working collaboratively with joint force elements, interagency partners, and international allies. The document reminds us that Marine expeditionary units, for example, are already accustomed to operating in this integrated fashion, often with joint and interagency tools, making them sort of natural practitioners of this concept.
Then there's the concept of coevolution, which suggests that competition is never static. It's a constant adaptation, a sort of strategic arms race that never truly ends.
That's a critical point. Competition is fundamentally coevolutionary, meaning one actor's competitive tool, action, or innovation inevitably prompts others to adapt. They either directly counter it or develop something new that displaces its advantage. The example given in the document is a classic, the co-evolution of concepts. U.S. power projection, epitomized by the unmatched capabilities of our carrier strike groups, led other nations to develop anti-Caesarea denial, A2AD capabilities, to neutralize that advantage. Now, the Joint Force is innovating once again to overcome A2AD, leading to new concepts like expeditionary advanced base operations. It's a continuous, dynamic cycle of challenge and response. Militaries are constantly juggling factors like switching costs, the effort and resources required to change an existing system, the cost curve, who can sustain the spending and effort longer, and opportunity cost, what is foregone by focusing resources on one competitive avenue over another. These are the strategic dilemmas that drive coevolution.
This whole dance of action and reaction, anticipating their moves, seeing ourselves through their eyes, sounds like the ODA loop on steroids, applied to a much longer timeline. For the Marine out there, perhaps on an exercise or even dealing with a local population, what's the immediate so what? How does internalizing that OD loop in this competitive context change their daily decision-making?
That's a fantastic question for the Marine on the ground. The document explicitly reiterates MCDP-1's teaching to get inside the enemy's thought processes, that classic observe, orient, decide, act cycle, and applies it directly to competitors. The so what is that every interaction, however seemingly small, becomes an opportunity to observe and orient. It's not just about speed, it's about the quality of your orientation. A subtle gesture, a shift in local sentiment, a minor economic change. These are all competitive data points. Internalizing OD here means constantly asking, what are they trying to achieve? How do they see this situation? What can I do to gain a micro advantage, even if it's just shaping information or building a better relationship? It's a constant feedback loop of observation, orientation, decision, and action applied to the competitive landscape, pushing advantage wherever and whenever you can.
Okay, let's deepen our understanding of this core theory. At the national level, what ultimately drives this constant competition? How do Marines fit into the grander policy picture, beyond just executing orders?
At its core, like war, Marines should think of competition as serving policy. Policy is the guiding force, and Marines must understand its development and context. The document highlights that policy is always framed by enduring interests, which for the U.S. have remained relatively stable since WWII. These include fundamental principles like maintaining constitutional values, protecting the homeland, promoting American prosperity, and advancing global influence. The freedom of navigation, an enduring U.S. interest example, perfectly illustrates a centuries-old, consistent interest that continuously shapes competitive policy, from the early U.S. Navy protecting commercial vessels to today's freedom of navigation operations, or FONAPs. It's crucial to recognize that adhering to these values, when part of a comprehensive and well-communicated strategy, can itself be a powerful competitive advantage, attracting allies and frustrating rivals' plans to undermine the international order.
And these policies aren't just handed down from on high, are they? They're often shaped by complex internal dynamics within a nation, like domestic politics.
Indeed. Domestic politics within nations, the often messy struggles among multiple centers of power, significantly affect policy choices and can introduce ambiguity. For Marines, this translates directly to how they receive resourcing decisions, guidance on the composition of the force, and specific direction from policymakers. Understanding this intricate interplay between domestic considerations and enduring national interests is crucial for grasping the broader intent behind specific decisions and anticipating the potential for shifts or contradictions in a competitor's actions.
And this all plays out over dramatically different timelines than we might typically associate with urgent military operations. That's a significant mental shift, isn't it?
It is a critical distinction, and one that requires considerable discipline. International competition, particularly among nations, plays out over a long timeline. This is in stark contrast to the desire to conclude a traditional war quickly. Marines need to internalize this, recognizing that competitive campaigns might span months, years, or even decades, requiring sustained effort, patience, and long-term thinking. It's a marathon, not a sprint, and sometimes it's a marathon with no clear finish line.
So in this persistent long-game competition, how do nations actually gain an edge? What defines competitive advantage, and what specific role does the military and the Marine Corps in particular play in contributing to it?
Advantage, as MCDP 1-4 defines it, is inherently relative. It means doing something better than its rival in a specific context. We see this at multiple levels. National advantages for the U.S. are extensive, encompassing its vast and dynamic economy, the dollar's global reserve role, a world-leading higher education system, and its steadfast commitment to global freedom of navigation. These advantages crucially stem from enduring qualities in areas such as its values, interests, and culture, forming a powerful foundation.
And then there are distinct military advantages that the U.S. brings to bear, things we're perhaps more familiar with.
Yes. Since WWII, the U.S. military has cultivated unparalleled advantages in global power projection, multi-domain operations expertise across land, sea, air, space, and cyber, and precision strike capabilities. The principled professionalism of the U.S. military is also highlighted as a distinct advantage, especially when contrasted with competitors who operate without regard for the rule of law or civilian protection. Crucially, these competitive advantages exist across the competition continuum and not only in time of war. Military exercises, for instance, don't just prepare for combat. They demonstrate military capability to impose cost on a potential rival, forcing them to expend resources to counter our strengths even if no shots are fired.
That example of Operation Outside the Box, the Israeli airstrike on Syria using cyber to defeat air defenses, really illustrates how a military competitive advantage can be a strategic signal for deterrence, even if it's not publicized immediately.
That's an excellent point, and a perfect illustration of how military advantage can be leveraged far beyond direct combat. The sophisticated use of cyber warfare tools to defeat Syrian air defenses during that strike demonstrated a competitive advantage that, as the analysis suggested, was about deterrence more than creating damage. It's a form of strategic revelation, a conscious decision on when and how to reveal sensitive advantages, balancing the immediate leverage it offers in information operations with the need to cloak certain capabilities for future, perhaps more critical, use. The key takeaway is that these advantages are not static. They can atrophy and require appropriate practice, exercising, and improving to remain effective in a dynamic competitive environment. Complacency is, well, it's a competitor's greatest friend.
To gain and maintain that advantage, we must understand our competitors deeply. But how should Marines conceptualize these complex adversaries? They're clearly not just mirror images of ourselves, fighting by the same rules or with the same intentions. How do we avoid that trap?
No, absolutely not, and assuming they are is a dangerous blind spot. MCDP 1-4 emphasizes that competitors are complex adaptive systems with many parts interacting in nonlinear, often unpredictable ways. The document uses the nuanced example of Iran's national security decision-making. From the outside, it might appear strictly hierarchical, right? Supreme leader, president at the apex. But the reality is far more intricate, deeply influenced by informal relationships, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, IRGC, significant financial power, and constant internal jockeying for influence among various factions. This dynamic often leads to sometimes unanticipated results from our perspective, making their actions difficult to predict or interpret. Understanding this internal complexity is vital as it reveals vulnerabilities and potential points of influence.
So we're not just looking at a linear chain of command, but a whole interconnected ecosystem of interacting forces, internal politics, power struggles.
Exactly. To help break down a competitor system, the document categorizes its components into people, ideas, and things. People are those who make the system work their skills, aptitudes, and ability to sustain or build advantages. Ideas encompass their goals, concepts, and processes. That quote from Mao Zedong, "Politics is war without bloodshed, while war is politics with bloodshed," that perfectly illustrates a powerful idea that fundamentally blurs the lines between peace and war, creating a distinctive competitive mindset in a rival. And things refer to the equipment, infrastructure, and material support. By developing a comprehensive model of how a competitor system fits together, Marines can identify both their strengths and critical weaknesses. But the caveat is crucial. Models are useful but imperfect. They are our theories about the systemic structure of our rival. We must remain alert for opportunities to improve our models with new information, and never assume our model is perfect. The systemic analysis isn't just for external rivals. We must also rigorously apply it to our own system to identify our strengths and vulnerabilities in people, ideas, and things, ensuring we maximize our own competitive advantages. It's a constant process of self-assessment and refinement.
Okay, so with this deep understanding of our rival systems, what specific tools do nations actually employ to achieve their goals in this competition? How does military force fit into this broader toolkit beyond just direct combat?
This is where we dive into the multifaceted elements of power, often referred to as diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. MCDP 1-4 highlights two primary, often complementary ways military forces use in competition: attraction and coercion. Attraction is defined as using incentives to induce a rival or other political actor to adopt a position favorable to us. It's the sophisticated counterpoint to coercion. Marines contribute significantly through demonstrating professional commitment, like providing bilateral training on amphibious operations with Japan, or through humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. Nationally, examples include the enduring strength of NATO, the influence of Fulbright scholars, or most favored nation trading status. The Huck Rebellion example perfectly illustrates a comprehensive attraction strategy using diplomatic, economic, and military tools, including LT Col Edward Lansdale's close relationship with Ramon Magsaysay, which helped secure the Philippines as a crucial ally against communism.
And then there's coercion, which for many Marines might immediately bring up images of force. But the document suggests it's more about influencing a decision than just imposing will. What's the critical distinction there, and how might we often get that wrong in our own thinking?
That's a fantastic distinction, and it's a common area for misinterpretation. Coercion is defined as using pressure, intimidate, or force someone into doing something, fundamentally influencing an adversary's will or incentive structure. It has two primary forms. First, compellence, which is a threat intended to make an adversary do something, to take a specific action, or to stop taking it once it has already started. The Suez Crisis and coercion example from the document is a powerful illustration. President Eisenhower used economic threats to compel Britain, France, and Israel to cease their operation against Egypt, effectively forcing them to reverse their actions. Then there's deterrence. Quote, a threat intended to inhibit an adversary from taking a particular action to prevent it from even getting started. A classic military example would be the forward deployment of a Marine expeditionary unit off a nation's coast to discourage a specific aggressive action.
So it's not about imposing will through sheer physical force, but influencing a decision. That's a crucial caveat for a force built on the application of violence.
Absolutely. The document profoundly emphasizes that the target of the coercion must cooperate, even if unwillingly. It's about manipulating their decision-making calculus, raising the cost of an undesired action, rather than just physically forcing an outcome. And this is where asymmetry of interests becomes a vital consideration. A weaker nation might defy a stronger one if it's willing to absorb more punishment or has a more powerful desire to achieve its interests. The Cod Wars between the UK and Iceland is a perfect historical illustration. Despite the UK's vastly superior military and economic power, Iceland's intensely stronger national interest in its fishing rights ultimately led to its success in expanding its exclusive fishing zones. It demonstrates that raw power doesn't always translate to coercive success if the other side has a disproportionate will.
Then there's the indispensable role of information, which the document says plays a special role in competition. It's not just another tool in the DIME framework,
Yeah.
but something that permeates all of them. Right.
Exactly. Information is fundamental, particularly through the construction and propagation of compelling narratives. Narratives give meaning to a set of facts and, critically, compete with each other for influence and belief. To effectively defeat a rival's narrative, it must be replaced by another one. Simply denying or refuting it is often insufficient and can even reinforce it. The Marine Corps itself possesses a powerful reputational advantage, a deterrent quality derived from its history of success in battle, adherence to high standards, and adaptability. This reputation is an incredibly powerful informational tool, shaping perceptions and influencing decisions without a shot being fired. The document also stresses that cultural differences affect how narratives are interpreted by various audiences, requiring Marines to deeply understand their target audience and tailor messages to ensure they are understood as intended, rather than inadvertently misinterpreted or even causing offense.
So with these diverse means in mind, attraction, coercion, and information, how do these competitive activities manifest across the continuum, particularly in what we often call the complex gray zone below the violence threshold? What does that look like in practice, beyond the theoretical definitions?
Well, the document provides a detailed array of activities that demonstrate this. Beyond traditional military actions, we see non-military activities like economic competition for market share or strategic trade agreements. But it also points to sharper economic acts like industrial espionage, the theft of intellectual property, or the use of sanctions, moving firmly into the competitive rather than benign realm.
And that's where the labels like hybrid, gray zone, or political warfare really come into play, describing these blended activities.
Exactly. These activities intricately combine the threat of violence and individual violent acts with ambiguity and uncertainty to cause rivals to hesitate. They can encompass overt, covert, and illegal activities, irregular tactics, terrorism, criminal behavior, all meticulously orchestrated to achieve political objectives without triggering a full-scale conventional war. This is where boundary stretching becomes particularly evident, with both sides consciously striving to stretch boundaries to increase their freedom of action. The gradualism and salami slicing example of China in the South China Sea perfectly illustrates this. Persistent actions like asserting the nine-dashed line, ramming vessels, deploying water cannons, and building artificial island fortifications accumulate into de facto control over vast maritime areas. All without triggering an organized military response from the international community. These small, repetitive steps avoid a major threshold breach while incrementally achieving profound strategic goals.
And beyond traditional coercion and attraction, there's also the strategic idea of imposing costs. That's a fascinating concept in this context. How does that work?
It is, and it's a critical component of competition. Imposing costs means developing a credible capability that forces a rival to spend resources in order to try and counter it. The example given is the DoD's response to the increasing frequency and sophistication of cyber attacks, which imposes significant opportunity costs in terms of the time, money, and personnel diverted to training, defense, and countermeasures. This expenditure by the adversary, forced by our own capabilities or actions, is itself a competitive act. It forces them to divert resources from other objectives they might prefer to pursue.
With so much happening below the violence threshold, often incrementally and ambiguously, how are decisions made? And how do we seize, or perhaps more dangerously, lose the initiative in this complex environment?
Decision-making is absolutely paramount, perhaps even more so in competition than in traditional warfare, due to the extended timelines and ambiguity. The document reiterates that all actions are the result of decisions or of non-decisions. Crucially, lacking the will or the foresight to make a decision when required surrenders the initiative. Conversely, gaining the initiative means presenting a dilemma to our competitor, forcing them to react to our terms and thereby setting the tempo. Marines are taught this fundamental lesson in warfighting, and it applies with equal, if not greater, force here.
But competitors also actively work to deny us that initiative, right? They're not just waiting for us to make the first move. They're trying to disrupt our tempo.
They absolutely do. Rivals often deliberately create ambiguity about their actions to cause a problem of attribution, making it difficult for us to definitively prove who did what or even that an action occurred. This ambiguity delays our response, slowing our tempo and buying them time. However, as the deployed units, using DCO to name and shame example shows, using defensive cyberspace operations, DCO, to identify and publicly expose bad actors can reverse this dynamic. It slows their tempo, imposes reputational costs, and forces them to react or explain themselves. This is a powerful cross-domain competitive act.
And the sheer immense timelines involved here naturally lead to opportunistic behavior. A small window can become a major strategic gain if you're patient.
That's right. Competitive actions play out over months or years, even decades. Unlike the compressed timelines of decisive combat, this extended timeline fosters opportunistic behavior. Rivals vigilantly exploit sudden, unexpected changes like natural disasters, economic crises, or even global pandemics to achieve their strategic goals without crossing the violence threshold. This combination of having no fixed timeline for achieving goals plus opportunism also leads to incrementalism, a patient strategy of achieving objectives through a series of small cumulative steps, each building on the last. The warfighting lessons for decision-making and seizing initiative are still profoundly valid, but Marines must apply discerning judgment in recognizing these dramatically different timelines and the patient, opportunistic nature of competition.
So how does this comprehensive philosophy of persistent competition translate into how the Marine Corps fundamentally operates? Given that competition is a constant state, what does this mean for the Corps' fundamental posture, its very identity as a whole?
The document is unequivocally clear. The Marine Corps is one of the nation's tools for the strategic competition. Its very existence, its capabilities, its forward posture, these are all competitive acts in themselves. Every day, Marine capabilities and force posture affect the thinking of our competitors, contributing to deterrence and shaping their perceptions. This inherent credibility also makes the Marine Corps attractive to allies and partners as a reliable force for security cooperation and a highly effective deterrent force against aggression.
And it truly begins right at the start of a Marine's journey, doesn't it? The foundation is built from day one, from recruitment.
Yes, it starts at recruitment. The quality level of individuals, their education, physical fitness, mental resilience, adaptability fundamentally determines the force's potential for innovation and competitive edge. Historically, the Marine Corps has always been the nation's hybrid force, adept at conducting activities that straddled the line between violence and nonviolence. The Banana Wars and Monroe Doctrine in the early 20th century powerfully illustrate this, where Marine deployments served as crucial diplomatic and informational tools, operating effectively on both sides of the violence threshold to secure U.S. interests. Even the iconic phrase, "most ready when the nation is least ready," is reframed in MCDP 1-4 as a competitive act in the informational element of national power, projecting readiness and capability to both allies and adversaries.
So how must Marines internally shift their mindset to truly embrace and operate effectively within this long-term integrated competitive environment? What does cultivating a campaigning mindset actually entail beyond simply going on a deployment? What does that look like day to day?
A campaigning mindset is fundamentally characterized by long-term thinking and recognizing the absolute necessity to integrate our actions with others, meaning naval, joint, interagency partners, and international allies. The example of competing on NATO's northern flank with the Norway Air-Landed Marine Expeditionary Brigade program perfectly illustrates this integration in action, demonstrating collective resolve to deter Soviet and now Russian aggression. A crucial aspect of this mindset is intellectual humility. MCDP 1-4 connects this directly to the ODA loop. Each decision is a hypothesis that gets tested in the real world when we act. Our plans, our operational concepts are fundamentally theories based on our competitor models, requiring constant feedback loops for continuous refinement and adaptation. This persistence means competition is truly more like a marathon than a sprint, demanding long-term commitment and constant alertness for how our competitive advantages and those of our rivals will shift over time. You can't just stop running at the finish line and expect to win the race.
So what does professionalism mean for a Marine in this expanded competitive context? Is it simply about being an expert in warfighting, or does it demand something more profound, more multifaceted?
While being a true expert in the conduct of war remains the first priority for any Marine, professionalism in competition extends significantly beyond that. Being demonstrably prepared for war is inherently a powerful competitive act for deterrence, aiming to keep conflict below the violence threshold. This professionalism, crucially, is grounded in our nation's values. It also requires a delicate balance, recognizing the need to effectively wield coercive tools while simultaneously understanding and executing the need to attract. An attraction strategy, for instance, can lead to greater deterrence through building increased interoperability with an ally or provide significant informational gains during disaster relief operations. The Marine Corps is, at its heart, a thinking profession, demanding mental discipline to challenge our assumptions, dispassionately assess the environment, and thereby set the pace for our competitors. This also increasingly includes emerging skills like writing computer code at the tactical edge, where Marines independently develop software for competitive advantage like automating SIGINT analysis or improving IED countermeasures. Making such innovation the norm instead of ad hoc exceptions, this isn't just about fighting smarter, it's about competing smarter every day.
If the very character of competition is constantly evolving, how then must Marine education adapt? Not just to keep pace, but to stay ahead and truly foster this new competitive way of thinking.
Professional military education, PME, is designed to develop creative thinking leaders in a continuous progressive process. The document stresses that leaders need mastery of the concepts for true innovation, going beyond mere adaptation. This includes a deep understanding of organizational learning, effective change management, and the crucial distinction between sustaining and disruptive innovation. The competitive lessons from the innovator's dilemma, that stark example of Eastman Kodak inventing digital photography but failing to market it due to protecting its film business, serves as a potent warning about the vulnerability to disruptive change if an organization fails to evolve its thinking. Education, therefore, must have a broadened focus. It is not enough for Marines to educate themselves on war and warfighting alone. Self-education in social, economic, technological, and other matters beyond military history and leadership are essential for a comprehensive competitive awareness. The ultimate goal is to foster awareness within the campaigning mindset, improve knowledge of and openness to the interests of potential and existing allies and partners, and crucially, increase the ability to envision greater possibilities in competition. It's about expanding intellectual horizons to match the expanding battle space.
So how does the Marine Corps then leverage its most valuable asset, its people, to truly excel in this constant state of competition? How does talent management play directly into generating competitive advantage?
Well, MCDP 1-4 directly connects talent management to warfighting's emphasis on individual judgment and action, where it explicitly states that Marines of a given grade and occupational specialty are not interchangeable. That is a profound statement. Effective organizations practice a strengths-based approach, meticulously placing their people in positions where they can genuinely use their innate strengths, coaching their development, and strategically linking individual strengths to broader organizational goals. Recognizing that some people excel at planning, others excel at taking a blueprint and then optimizing it, and then deliberately matching those diverse skills to duties maximizes the performance of their people over time. This isn't just good HR, it actively creates a sustained competitive advantage for the entire Corps because it leverages human capital as a strategic weapon.
This all sounds like a massive continuous undertaking. So how does this comprehensive understanding of competition translate into the concrete process of building and implementing the Marine Corps itself? What does force planning look like in this new paradigm, and how does it ensure we're always thinking several steps ahead?
Force planning is, without exaggeration, a complex undertaking. It must balance utility at many points on the competition continuum with building a force that is a functional tool for winning battles. The output of this planning must be designed to present a dilemma to our potential competitors and defeat their plans against us by strategically combining organization, doctrine, training, and equipment to create competitive advantage. The document profoundly highlights the importance of asymmetry in competition. The assault breaker concept from the 70s and 80s, a U.S. response to overwhelming Soviet armor superiority, demonstrated how to offset a quantitative advantage with a qualitative asymmetric approach. Similarly, China often projects power asymmetrically through coordinated use of all three of its armed forces C components. The Navy, Coast Guard, and maritime militia presenting a unified, ambiguous front that traditional naval forces struggle to counter effectively.
So it's about finding those unique ways to impose costs and gain an advantage, not necessarily by mirroring a rival's strengths, but by exploiting their weaknesses or changing the game.
Exactly. Force planning is a continual effort to stay ahead, making it a competitive act in itself. It demands the ability to reconfigure the force rapidly and cultivate the mental flexibility that comes from humility and the disciplined practice of questioning assumptions. Historically, the Marine Corps has proven its capacity for this. The staying competitive in an era of tactical nukes example shows how the Hogaboom board and MCTU number 1 developed pioneering helicopter-borne amphibious methods in the 1950s. They entirely reinvented amphibious warfare to remain a credible deterrent despite the new threat of tactical nuclear weapons. The ultimate ambition here is to explore thoroughly how the Marine Corps can contribute to preventing war by regularly operating below the violence threshold, even as Marines are ready to operate above it when required. It's about being the ultimate flexible, adaptive tool for the nation across the entire spectrum.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly. If we're truly compete effectively, we have to grasp how our rivals think. How difficult is it to truly know your enemy, especially when their worldview, their very operating system, might be fundamentally different from our own?
It's immensely difficult, and the document leans on powerful insights here. George Kennan's quote is particularly illustrative. To try to describe what life is like in Russia to someone who has never been there is like trying to describe the mysteries of love to a person who has never experienced it. Hal Brands reinforces this, stating, "Competing effectively requires knowing your competition intimately." This isn't a passive exercise. It requires serious reflection and critical thinking, an intellectual discipline to consciously see beyond their own patterns of thought, to shed our own biases. Without it, creating truly useful, predictive models of rival approaches is, well, impossible.
And it all starts with their orientation, doesn't it? The OODA loop isn't just about speed. It's about how that initial observe and orient phase fundamentally shapes everything else that follows.
That's exactly right. Orientation influences all other elements of the OODA loop because it fundamentally controls how people make sense of what they observe and shapes their subsequent decisions and actions. Orientation encompasses everything from language, culture, genetics, to education and previous experience. Humans naturally use heuristics, or mental shortcuts, developed from their orientation. The document gives the example of driving. A right turn becomes an automatic, intuitive action after years of experience a heuristic developed. This applies to complex, dangerous situations too. Critically, two people can look at a set of facts and come to very different conclusions about what these facts mean, precisely because their orientation shapes their individual and collective narratives, the deeply ingrained stories that explain how the world works for them.
So what specific aspects of a rival's orientation lead them to compete so profoundly differently from us? How do their words, their deeply held cultural beliefs, truly shape their behavior and strategic choices in ways that might surprise us or even seem illogical from our perspective?
Language is a profound shaper of behavior. The document contrasts Western uses of competition, evoking images of sporting events, market share, maybe a contest with clear rules, with rivals terms like struggle or perhaps embracing while fighting. Mao Zedong's profoundly influential, quote, "Politics is war without bloodshed, while war is politics with bloodshed," fundamentally shifts the entire worldview. It implies a constant existential state of war that simply manifests violently at times. This outlook, the document argues, fundamentally alters the tools and tactics a rival might choose and, crucially, exposes a blind spot in Western society's tendency to think of themselves as either at peace or at war. We simply don't have the same linguistic or conceptual framework for persistent non-kinetic struggle.
And beyond language, there's the deep, often unconscious influence of culture, that invisible operating system guiding how people behave.
Yeah, culture is defined as the accumulated shared learning of how to solve internal and external problems, operating much like an operating system below conscious awareness. It provides the basic rule set for how a group perceives, thinks, feels, and ultimately behaves. For instance, collectivist or group-focused cultures prioritize consensus and group harmony, often leading to decisions that can take months or even years to build broad agreement. This isn't right or wrong compared to our more individualistic, perhaps faster decision-making. It's a fundamental difference in how value is placed on decision speed versus group cohesion and long-term stability.
That's a huge difference in tempo and strategic approach.
Yeah.
And culture also heavily influences how risk is perceived and tolerated, right? What might seem reckless to us could be perfectly rational, even necessary to them.
Absolutely. Different attitudes toward identifying and weighing risk can lead to what appears to us as surprising behavior, such as Chinese and Russian ships and aircraft maneuvering in close proximity to U.S. forces. While this seems unnecessarily dangerous and provocative to us, for them, operating this way might be perfectly justified, even desirable, within their war without bloodshed mindset, a necessary display of resolve in a constant struggle. Finally, culture produces a distinct frame of mind and intuition for making the right choice, which is deeply culturally defined. This means their intuitive choices will often differ drastically from ours, and may even be difficult for the rival to consciously explain precisely because they are intuitive, they're ingrained.
So what fundamentally drives our rivals' competitive actions? What are their core assumptions about the world that lead to these profoundly differing approaches to competition?
A central driver is that rivals often perceive that they are under threat, with regime survival as their absolute top priority, especially for authoritarian governments. This perception, whether objectively true or not from our standpoint, heavily influences every competitive choice they make. They constantly study the elements of U.S. national power, much like the Soviet correlation of forces during the Cold War or China's adherence to Sun Tzu's Know Your Enemy. Their goal is not just to understand, but to offset U.S. advantages or to find seams to exploit in our system.
And their view on international norms and what constitutes legitimate action is also very different from ours, isn't it? That seems like a critical disconnect, a major source of friction.
Indeed. Some rivals have a different outlook about the legitimacy of using aggressive action, whether it's offensive cyber operations, political interference, or disinformation campaigns. They often do not feel bound by standing international agreements and norms unless it's strategically advantageous to them at that moment. Their behavior consistently indicates that they respect resource constraints or hard power deterrence as the only kind of limits. The Russia's NATO perception gray box illustrates this perfectly. Many Russians genuinely perceived disrespect and increasing threats from NATO expansion and U.S. policies in the 90s and 2000s. This led them to perceive these actions a threat to their country and particularly their regime, which in their mind justifies their own competitive choices and aggressive actions. It's a closed loop of perceived threat and justified response.
Pulling it all together, what does a rival's overall approach to competition look like, especially with their permanent struggle mindset? What are the common threads, the defining characteristics we should be acutely aware of?
The document absolutely emphasizes this permanent struggle mindset. For them, there is literally no at-peace condition. It's simply when and how they will compete, not if. This means the tools they use are limited only by human creativity and available resources, and they are constantly poised to exploit any chance they see emerging. The document lists several common characteristics of this approach: strong central command and control, clear strategic goals, powerful narratives tailored to diverse audiences, and critically, the weaponization of benign activities. This also includes recruitment of ethnic diasporas, domination of ethnic media, interference in local politics, intelligence and covert operations, often with little regard for legal norms, and having a powerful military cover that supports an expanded concept of combined arms that goes far beyond traditional military domains. They also consistently demonstrate an acceptance of high levels of risk and are inherently postured for the long term.
The weaponization of benign activities. Tourism in targeted countries, for example with Palau, is genuinely striking, showcasing how China used something as innocuous as tourism to create economic dependency and then manipulated it to pressure Palau over its relations with Taiwan. That's a masterclass in exploiting perceived blind spots.
It's a perfect illustration of how they combine these characteristics in novel and innovative ways to pursue their goals while taking advantage of the United States and its allies' blind spots, like being at peace.
Yeah.
Tourism, seemingly benign, becomes a strategic lever, turning economic ties into a tool of political coercion. This reveals a crucial lesson. Nothing is truly benign in a permanent struggle. Everything can be weaponized.
So in light of this permanent struggle mindset, what is their ultimate theory of victory in this constant, multifaceted competition, especially when compared to our maneuver warfare approach of shattering an enemy's cohesion? How do they fundamentally see themselves winning this long game?
Well, MCDP-1 describes maneuver warfare as aiming to shatter an enemy's cohesion through shock and speed. Our rival's theory of victory in competition is fundamentally different, built on three core principles. First, it's rooted in an authoritarian power structure where regime survival is the top priority. Every action is filtered through this lens. Second, they strive to avoid war with the United States because of the immense costs, but they will selectively cross over the threshold of violence against allies and partners. always keeping a tight rein on escalation to avoid direct confrontation with the U.S. These discrete pulses of violence can be useful for boundary stretching and to create hesitation in their adversaries. Third, for them, competition is a constant state where every decision and action affects it, either setting conditions for future gains or reaching their goals through slow increments or opportunistic lunges when windows of opportunity appear.
So in essence, their theory is a patient, pervasive strategy of winning without fighting.
Precisely. It's winning without fighting, or, as the document puts it, winning war before it starts. This is fueled by a deeply held, often existential, perceived constant threat to regime survival. It's an approach focused on shaping the environment incrementally or opportunistically, achieving strategic goals without triggering a full-scale military conflict with the United States. It's a continuous, multi-domain siege.
Let's ground this abstract theory in a concrete example. How might a rival actually execute such a sophisticated, long-term campaign? The document provides a hypothetical scenario for the Baltics that vividly illustrates their approach.
Yes, this hypothetical scenario, the Baltics gray box, is incredibly illuminating. It begins with central authority and narrative. Objectives set by a strong central authority, framed by a powerful narrative tailored to multiple audiences, especially for domestic audiences, such as the defense of native Russian speakers. They engage in continuous study and ODA, deeply studying their competitors and using constant feedback loops to refine their approach, probing for weaknesses and opportunities. Critically, there's relentless conditions setting. They constantly try to shape the environment for rapid advance. This could involve transmitting their narrative on Russian-language media broadcast into the Baltics to build sympathy, conducting cyber and media operations to slow a NATO response, engaging in nuclear posturing to deter intervention, and prepositioning capabilities like smart mines and unmanned underwater vehicles.
And then the actual action would likely be incremental or opportunistic, designed to create a fait accompli before anyone can react effectively, like the salami slicing we talked about.
Exactly. This would involve sending military units in unmarked uniforms or mercenary equivalents, the little green men phenomenon, using swarms of small but lethal drones, electronic warfare, and loitering smart munitions. The goal is a rapid fait accompli, seizing territory and establishing a new reality before NATO and the international community could react. This demonstrates an expanded concept of combined arms, blending all elements of national power in a unified strategic manner. The Iran's many competitive tools example further showcases this. Iran deploys an impressive array of tools, blending information, cyber, energy diplomacy, covert operatives, proxy forces, economic tools, and military arms into a new 21st century form of combined arms for regime survival and avoiding direct, full-scale war with a superior power. It's a complete system designed for protracted struggle.
So as Marines, how do our core principles, the very things that define how we fight in war like maneuver warfare, translate to this broader competitive arena? Does it remain relevant, or do we need entirely new concepts to deal with this?
The document is unequivocally clear. Marines can use maneuver warfare principles to great effect in competition. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, but rather understand how to apply it broadly. We still aim to achieve goals in a flexible and opportunistic way, seeking to outmaneuver our competitors intellectually and strategically, not just physically. And crucially, we still seek to achieve a relative tempo advantage so that we gain the initiative. Marines' in-depth understanding of the ODA loop is relevant everywhere on the competition continuum, from a squad leader's immediate decision to a strategic planner's long-term campaign. It's not about discarding maneuver warfare, but about thinking through how it can be applied across the competition continuum, extending its reach far beyond just the subset of war.
Just as in combat, know your enemy is paramount. How do Marines achieve this deep understanding in competition? And what actions flow directly from that precise orientation? What does that look like?
Orienting on the competitor is fundamental to successful competition. This means developing an incredibly robust understanding of the competitor system and then exploit the weaknesses that model reveals. We must constantly create, test, and refine models of the rival's system using the continuous feedback of the ODA loop. MCDP1's profound lesson to get inside an adversary's thought processes and see them as they see themselves is reiterated here with the critical caveat. We should not assume that every adversary thinks as we do, competes as we do, or shares our values or objectives. This intimate knowledge is what enables effective forcing, even unwilling cooperation for compellence or deterrence. But it's equally vital for effective attraction strategies, whether it's humanitarian assistance that builds trust or carefully cultivated networks with allies and partners. The Joint Special Operations Task Force Orients on Competitor example vividly shows how deeply understanding AQI's network structure and speed led the task force to break down stovepipes and push authority to the edges, allowing them to become faster and more effective than their adversary. Orienting correctly drove effective action.
Beyond just reacting to a competitor's moves, how do Marines proactively shape the competitive environment to our advantage? What does shaping the action truly look like in this broader, more subtle context?
Shaping the action starts with a deeply vision-driven approach. Our goals are derived from vital national interests, establishing what we want to accomplish, why, and how, to align our actions and ensure every effort contributes to the larger strategy. This requires continuous refinement of our competitor models, constantly focusing on their weaknesses and cultural influences. Simultaneously, we must develop the intellectual discipline to see ourselves through our competitors' eyes, to objectively identify our own vulnerabilities before they do. Planning and force posture play a critical, often unseen role in shaping general conditions for long-term competition, not always detailed tactical timetables. Force posture, as seen in that remarkable historical example of preventing Nazi penetration of South America before WW II through Pan American Airlines' secret airfield program, contributes powerfully to deterrence, diplomacy, information campaigns, and building ties with partners. Acting as a competitive force, even without direct combat, it's about subtle, persistent leverage.
So what does combined arms mean when the arms extend far beyond traditional military capabilities into diplomacy, information, economics, and cyber? How do we orchestrate all available tools to create a decisive competitive advantage?
Well, combined arms is the full integration of arms in such a way that to counteract one, the enemy must become more vulnerable to another. That fundamental principle doesn't change, but its scope explodes. The goal is to pose the enemy not just with a problem, but with a dilemma, a no-win situation. Broadening this to include positive-sum options in competition, where allies gain while the adversary is disadvantaged. This now extends to a multi-domain, multi-partner mindset. It involves seamlessly combining internal Marine Corps units, like assault support plus infantry, the broader joint force, interagency partners like USAID or the FBI, and international allies. For instance, a Marine infantry squad paired with a Coast Guardsman becomes a uniquely potent law enforcement element in an illicit trafficking scenario, leveraging different authorities and capabilities.
Using deception, too.
Absolutely. Furthermore, deception and noise become critical additions to this expanded combined arms toolkit in every domain. They multiply distributed effects, mask our true locations and intentions, create false signatures, and are inherently cost-imposing by forcing adversaries to expend valuable resources on verification, even during routine exercises. Modern technology, especially through APIs for shared operating pictures, is bringing this vision within reach. By allowing multiple users to be customers of the sensor data without knowing where it came from, it fosters a truly unified understanding across partners. This aligns defense interests and, crucially, presents our common competitor a dilemma they can't easily unravel.
How do Marines actually construct and execute a sustained, long-term competitive campaign? What are the practicalities and challenges of this enduring campaign of competition that unfolds over years, not just weeks?
The Marine Corps, it's important to remember, plays an important but supporting role in our nation's various competitions. Our campaign goals flow directly from enduring national interests and must align with theater combatant commanders' objectives and ideally with broader interagency goals. Our deep understanding of the OODA loop means that every choice we make in a campaign should be treated as a hypothesis to be tested. If we take a certain action, we anticipate our competitor will react in a certain way. Our observations then refine our theories, allowing us to gain the initiative in competition and set its tempo over the long haul.
And manage those long timelines.
Exactly. Given the inherently long timelines, often over several decades, it's usually better to take small steps toward the goal than it is to take large risks that could prematurely escalate. Our objectives should remain relatively stable over time, as seen with the consistent U.S. interest in freedom of navigation. Sustainability and tempo are crucial considerations. We must avoid imposing costs on ourselves that consume our resources at a rate we cannot support, and ensure our activities are complementary with our partners' plans. Tempo here is driven by action and counteraction, whether it plays out over decades, like NATO expansion, or seconds, as in cyberspace. Finally, narrative dominance is vital. Each campaign has a narrative, and to defeat a competitor's narrative, we need to replace it with a more persuasive one. Simply denying someone's story may actually reinforce it. It's about telling a better, more resonant story that captures hearts and minds.
What an incredible deep dive into MCDP 1 to 4. It truly brings the discussion full circle, reinforcing that this document represents a fundamental paradigm shift for the Marine Corps. Competing isn't just a set of actions we take, it's a profound way of thinking. Much like maneuver warfare, a state of mind born of boldness, intellect, initiative, and opportunism. It's about a constant, dynamic engagement with the world around us.
Indeed. The core message that every Marine must internalize is that they must prepare themselves to act on both sides of the threshold, and to do so in disciplined ways that advance the nation's interests. Quote, "The Marine Corps is, and always will be, an essential tool in the enduring competition that is the normal state of international relations. It requires a sophisticated understanding of our competitor system so that we can develop, sustain, and adapt our competitive advantage, ensuring the Marine Corps remains an indispensable and constantly useful tool for the nation, no matter the challenge."
So, as you, the listener, consider your own role, whether in daily duties or planning for the future, how do the profound ambiguity, uncertainty, and complexity of this continuous competition affect your decision-making? Even in what might seem like ordinary operations or peacetime, what internal or external competitive advantages can you identify within your unit or team right now? And what specific proactive steps are you actively taking to sustain or improve them against potential rivals, even those not immediately apparent?
And considering the immense importance of orientation, what deliberate steps can you personally take to get inside a competitor's worldview, to truly understand their motivations, values, and strategic calculus? And perhaps more critically, how can you rigorously ensure your own inherent cultural lens isn't creating dangerous blind spots in how you assess threats, perceive opportunities, and anticipate responses?
And finally, if competing is a way of thinking, a mindset that demands constant intellectual agility, what specific practical changes will you make in your professional education, your daily practice, and your leadership approach to cultivate that truly campaigning mindset? How will you ensure you're always thinking several steps ahead in this enduring global struggle?